I can assure you they weren't dancing at my hospital. I didn't see any either. Except online. But the time period when the dances really took place, at least the majority of them, it was during a specific time frame. Because if people remember, we did not have the COVID peaks all at the same time across the United States. Like New York was, I think, 3 weeks ahead of Chicago in hitting their peak. So different states, different cities had the peak of COVID at different times. So if you remember prior to that, there was, okay, we're going to lockdowns, right? And then what you had was most people at home. And then that's when the mainstream media got on stage and began we are going to terrify the public. We are going to scare the hell out of everyone. And they did a fantastic job because they managed to keep everybody from coming to the ER. That was until COVID hit the peak, and then you started seeing people come in. But just a side note, it's interesting because I was working in the ER during COVID in 2020, and we didn't have any flu. That's just what's strange. But the year before, we were far more busy with flu outbreak. Flu is always the worst time. But COVID wasn't even as bad as flu. Not where I was at, just saying. I would just say, did your hospital see any flu in 2020 during COVID? I doubt it. Anyway, so that prior to that peak hitting, nurses, because usually we have people coming to the ER for inappropriate, things that they should go to their doctor for. But everybody knows people will just sooner run to the emergency room. And of course, the emergency room won't turn anybody away. They'll even come in for scripts. We weren't having anybody. And that's how it was across the country, unless those cities were in the peak of their COVID. So nobody was coming to ER. I mean, nobody. And so the nurses who normally are spread so thin, you have no time to do anything, sometimes even go to the bathroom, were suddenly had nothing to do. They already, stocked everything. Everything was done that they could do. And so to kill time, they did some dancing videos. And it was well received by the public at first. But I think what happened was that as people realized something more was going on with this COVID mess, there was more to this, and there was a lot of lies. Then the public started seeing the nurses doing those dancing videos as that they're trying to toy with us. But they weren't. They don't step outside the box. Nobody in healthcare was seeing what I was seeing. I mean, I've only come across a couple of nurses since COVID that totally see it. People just don't. Because again, it's been ingrained and drilled into their brain that silly talk, that silliness. No, the journals, the peer-reviewed, would never lie to us. They type up their articles so magnificently, except that, at least in mental health, they don't prove to be correct. So there was just this disconnect and a lot of cognitive dissonance, I would say, too. But nurses weren't doing the dancing videos to rub it in people's faces. They weren't. It was during that time frame when everyone was too afraid to even leave their house. That said, I stepped outside the box. I was forced to step outside the box a long time ago. So I was too educated into the box of, we critically think within the boundaries of CDC and what experts say of science and what Lancet says, and, all the journals. I was trained the same way, but I was forced into breaking outside that box because I saw from my first nursing job what nurse leadership would do, and not just one. I went on to another job to see how disgraceful they were. And I don't just mean, I mean like diabolical. And yet I also saw how, boy, there's so many things we could do to improve this for kids that are in DCFS. So why can't we? No, nobody wanted to. It's like everybody that was in place, not at the bedside, but in any leadership, was placed there because it's almost like they were picked because, I don't know, the powers that be knew they would just be deadbeats. At least at some places. Knew that they wouldn't care enough to do the right thing. Just, they would do what they're told. So, but, you know, seeing a nurse, a chief nursing officer, something I would never think would happen, that I'm told that she emotionally manipulated and tried to twist a kid's words, a 15-year-old patient, all to try to go after me for something. Like, this was all dishonest. She was a chief nursing officer, totally higher educated, had her nose so far in the air. I mean, you know, it's a wonder that she didn't run into walls when she walked. But then I go on to another job, and I run into somebody that, because the hospitals, I started seeing how shady they were. They don't want to fire you if they can avoid it, because if they fire you, then you can collect unemployment. Because usually if they're being shady, okay? Because they keep the deadbeats. That's what I've noticed too, is they will keep the most god-awful people, the laziest people, but sometimes abusive people, but they will go after the honest. I've seen that way too many places. So all that stuff forced me. I mean, and I had a nurse that changed a narcotic count in a Pyxis. So they do these little setups because they want to get a nurse to quit. Because again, if they investigate it, then it has to go to the nursing board, and nurses are terrified of the nursing board. So this is the games they play. Then they can get you to resign, and then you never get to collect unemployment, and they've treated you like shit and have done you wrong, and nobody, you know, they're never held accountable. So all of that happening to me, it's like, I don't know, it's like there was a bullseye on my back or something. I really don't know. It forced me outside the box, because everything I thought about nursing and thought about healthcare was completely turned on its head. It's like it's the opposite of everything that I think most nurses envision, and then they get into it and it's like, oh, you eventually get to that place. It's like, no, it's really all about money. And even then, even if you can do something for them that's totally free, that they don't have to pay for, still the hospitals, like what Northwestern, we could have had somebody free come into our department. I asked for her. She was an expert. She ran a safe house in my county for women fresh out of trafficking to help them transition back into society. And she could have came in and told us, gave us a presentation. She said she'd do it all for free. And that wouldn't have cost Northwestern a dime, not a dime. And they said no. So like stuff like that, it's just, no, you don't want to help people. Like if you really look at the pattern, if nurses really looked at the pattern, and most nurses know it, they just may not want to be honest with themselves about it. There's a pattern that it's like, do you really want to help people? No. And then what makes it worse is they get some of these nurses that are chief nursing officers that decide to be a sellout, to be a corporate nurse, and really they're just not a nurse anymore, because they can look in your eyes and know that they're playing the corporate game with you, and they think you're going to believe their bullshit. Those are the worst those people are not nurses. They're just good corporate tools. Yeah, some of them are really bad at it. A lot of nurses will leave leadership because they do have an ethical a moral compass, and they realize that in order to stay in corporate, I'm going to have to sell out to corporate. And so if they sell out, then they are selling out that genuine nurse part of them, because they just become a liar like everybody else at the corporate level. That's really what the corporate level does, is lie. And they find the people that have no problem lying, and really, I would say many that just don't have a conscience, or have very little of a conscience. So when you're forced to step outside the box of all the experts, well, then you really see how dark and dirty it is.